Some of the things I enjoy most about the Burntwood Lecture is, obviously there's the insightful speakers, and we've been just incredibly lucky over the last 8 or 7 years to have some really good speakers.
What do the following things have in common? Crime, North Korea, poverty, cancer, drugs, terror and climate change. And of course you all got the answer straight away, didn't you? We're still at war with all of them.
I think my personal highlight is actually having someone like Steve give the Burntwood Lecture. I think it's very refreshing to have a completely different way of looking at environmental problems.
So something, have you ever wondered what your lecture would, or your ideas would be like if you were coming from an egalitarian perspective or from a competitive perspective?
Well, it's interesting.
Would they agree with what you said,
whether
basically?
You characterise me coming from a hierarchical perspective. I wonder what your own perspective is to see that as hierarchical, because I see myself coming at it from a clumsy perspective, which is to say I think that what I'm arguing precisely is in fact that I value all three ways of thinking and experiencing the natural world and the social world.
It's very enjoyable to hear from a good range of environmental science speakers and to hear from people who have got such diverse backgrounds. And for that reason, the Burntwood Lecture really is, for me, as an academic teaching environmental science, a very useful venue because I can take lessons from it back to my students.
I think it's so rare that we get the opportunity to take a step back and think about how our daily grind in working for our clients' needs and aspirations to reduce pollution and combat climate change in what is a fairly two-dimensional way in direct response to the sorts of targets which our presenter illustrated as a fairly blunt instrument to affect any real change. So it's great to see this way of thinking.
I was going to ask you whether you thought innovation also can arise from the regulatory regime and actually from the science, because I think all three offer innovation possibilities, personally.
Sure. I would argue against a simple linear notion that science produces knowledge which is then transformed into technology and is then has the form of innovation. And yes, there is an interaction, and certainly at the very least there is an enabling or a blocking function that hierarchy can take with respect to the creative urges of the competitive individualist orientation.
I think the Burntwood Lectures generally have been successful in encouraging people who have something slightly different to say about the whole environmental sector. And I think that their views generally over the years, sometimes they've been controversial, sometimes not so controversial, but what they have been, they've been very different, and they've been very effective at stimulating further discussions and different ways of looking at things.
But also there's a networking, there's what's going on right behind me, where people from across sectors, from industry to government to academia, NGOs, are just exchanging, bouncing off each other. We don't do that enough. We tend to think in our narrow sectors and imagine that we can devise workable solutions individually, whereas the creativity actually happens when we bounce off each other. So I think more gatherings like this, more alcohol to get the creative processes going is always a good thing.
In a lot of ways, I think it's challenged a good many of us tonight to how can we bring this more three-dimensional approach to what we do and add value and affect the change that we kind of got into the business to try and affect in the first place. So yeah, it's been a real treat, and it's a privilege to have been involved, and hooray for the IES.